friends. My name is Stephanie Romero, and I am the founder and executive director of Awaken Pittsburgh. I want to welcome you to our podcast, The Ripple Effect. Awaken Pittsburgh is a nonprofit dedicated to fostering well-being, empathy, and compassion for all by teaching and encouraging mindfulness and meditation practices. I also want to take a moment to let you know that Awaken Pittsburgh offers many other opportunities for practice and connection. For example, you can join our online community, which features a space to more deeply explore the topics we cover with our guests. We have weekly posts to spark thought, practice, and reflection. I hope you will come join us to explore, connect with others, and deepen your practice. You can find out more at awakenpittsburgh.org. Welcome to the Ripple Effect podcast. Today on our program, we are really fortunate to have Tim Van Ness. Tim is the founder and president of Van Ness & Company and the best-selling author of Leading with Self-Awareness, Starting from the Inside Out. With almost 30 years leveraging a unique background in the use of theater, storytelling, and action methods for organizational development and change, leadership development, and executive coaching, Tim helps organizations live values, develop leaders, and nurture culture. His passion is helping people deeply connect with their own internal knowing and truth, then connecting with others through their unique presence and authentic voice to build trusted relationships. Informing his role as an executive and leadership coach, program designer, seasoned facilitator, and public speaker are unique training in music education, improvisational theater, storytelling, psychodrama, self-regulation therapy, transpersonal psychology, and sound healing. Tim is a certified psychosynthesis life coach and a singer-songwriter who performs internationally. He lives in Western Massachusetts with his wife and cat. I'm so happy to have this conversation with Tim today. Thank you for joining us. Tim, thank you so much for joining me on the Ripple Effect for our episode. And this month we're focusing on welcoming, and I think it lines up really, really well with the work you do in the world. So I'm excited to have this conversation.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
So I always love to just ask people to start, how did you find meditation or mindfulness? What's your journey with that? And yeah, anything you want to mention about impacting your life?
Sure. I'd say I've been a spiritual seeker, I suppose, all my life. My father was a minister, Presbyterian minister. My mother was a Christian educator, and they actually got introduced to meditation in the late 60s, early 70s. They were on the progressive side of things. And then I remember in seventh grade social studies class, we had a guest come in and she had us move all the desks out of the way and lie on the floor. And it turned out it was a guided meditation thing. And we, visualized ourselves walking down the steps to a door and into another land and all that kind of stuff. So I went home and I told my parents about it. My mother was like, that was meditation. I was like, okay, it was kind of cool. And that was my first introduction to it, I suppose. My background is in music education and theater. So I went to college tried to do both music education and theater. And so in the theater world, I would say that was the next area in which I kind of learned about that. Because in theater, we spend a lot of time on the floor, going inside, being aware of our mental state, our emotional state, our physical state, because our bodies, our voices, our minds, our emotions, they are the tools we use as actors. So we need to be very conscious, and it was, sort of maybe before I knew the word mindfulness, but we have to be very mindful and conscious of those dimensions of our being. So that's another way I got into it. And then in college, I got introduced to, my father may have even suggested the book A Gradual Awakening by Stephen Levine, which is a kind of a classic primer in Vipassana or mindfulness meditation. And so that's where I got started. And you asked about its impact on, on my life. It's continued to be a part of my life. And I've learned a lot of different types of practices, and I have my own practice that I practice now every day. And it also informed my work because my background in theater, and especially improvisational theater, which is even more requires you to be in the moment and present and conscious of what's emerging in the moment and using that as information or, as material to work with. I used that and leveraged that experience in theater to be able to work with organizations actually and dramatize workplace culture issues. And that led me into the whole world of leadership development. So you could say the whole the whole theme of mindfulness and meditation very much informed my path and my career.
That's awesome. I love the seventh grade social studies story. That's really, really wonderful. So you may not know this, but I was a middle school teacher for 16 years. And so when I hear that story, it lights me up, makes me happy that you had that experience and that you were introduced to this so young.
Yeah.
That's just really, really amazing. And that your mom could name it for you. Um, yeah, I'm curious, do you have a regular daily practice? You mentioned that, and what does that look like?
Yeah, I do. And the practice is more, so one dimension of meditation is just being still and really tracking the thoughts and the feelings and the experiences and the sensations in the body. I try to practice that, although the practice I do now actually involves singing or chanting the word hue, H-U, like the person's name or the word that describes color. Hue, which is an ancient name for the divine, and it's sung ultimately as a love song. And there's something about that process of singing the word hue that puts me in touch with all of the dimensions of my higher aspect of who we are as soul. And from there, various experiences can happen, and part of the process is following whatever experiences emerge. And sometimes there's a focus around contemplation, which is a specific form of meditation where I may contemplate on a particular question, or even just something as simple as focusing on gratitude and where do I feel and experience gratitude in my life and what I'm grateful for. So it's a bit more of perhaps mentally focused, but ultimately the goal is to get beyond just the mind and really touch all those deeper places of, all the essence of who we are, which is not just our thoughts. It's not just our feelings. We're so much more.
I love that. We haven't had on the podcast at least someone talk about chanting practices, and I myself have spent many hours chanting, not in the singing kind, but in the Tibetan tradition.
Hmm.
There are many mantras in the Tibetan tradition, and I just love chanting. I really love it. And the interesting piece for me is, sometimes science tells us why these ancient practices are so uplifting or helpful. And there's a research studies now on trauma healing that the vibrational aspects in the voice actually can promote trauma healing. And so singing and
Yes.
chanting, like I love the way you described it because as you were describing it, I was like, yes, that's the trauma healing. That's the uplift that we get when we chant and we actually vocalize, right? Because
Yes.
we can chant silently, right? And that's great. That's also a meditative practice, but the vocalization that goes with it, I think there's even I want to say that it's Peter Levine, but you just mentioned Stephen Levine, and I'm like, am I getting that confused? But there's writing on even buzzing, just buzzing,
Hmm.
vocalizing. So
Yeah,
that's,
Peter Levine
yeah,
is
I
an
got it
expert
right
in
then.
healing trauma,
Okay. Yeah.
and Stephen Levine is the expert in mindfulness meditation. So yeah, there's perhaps overlap there. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
they're both
Awesome.
great. Yeah.
Yeah. I was like, I think it's Peter Levine, but he just said Stephen Levine. I wasn't sure if I was getting that right. Yeah. Yeah. So that's amazing and really good information to share with people on the podcast that like sometimes we have a really fixed idea of meditation and no, there's hundreds of practices that folks can be exploring and find one that really, really lands for you right now, that lifts
Yes.
you up, that supports you, that helps you connect with your higher self and all the things you just described. So that's really, really beautiful. Thank you for naming that.
You're welcome. And I think that's key, just finding what works for you.
Mhm.
There are people, I've known people that have been, been introduced to sitting meditations, and then they've had teachers that say, You shouldn't be sitting." Like sitting meditation for you, it's going to drive you nuts because the activity of your mind is just, so try a walking meditation, or try,
Yes.
meditating while you're, just staying really present while you're cooking in the kitchen or whatever. There's
Mhm.
so many different practices, and you're right, finding one that really fits for where you are right now and what you need right now is absolutely key.
Awesome. Well, as I mentioned in the beginning, this topic of welcoming is one that we have kind of selected for this month. And I really think it aligns with what you also mentioned, which is your work with leadership development and team building. So I don't know if you could share with me how you think, well, both welcoming and I think mindfulness or meditation has influenced or been incorporated into that work.
It's a great question. I think both of them are true. Well, welcoming is key. The idea and the concept of welcoming is key in working with teams and working with leaders and doing leadership development. A lot of the work I've done has been in the context of training, leadership development training, so working with small groups of people or large groups of people. And any time we're engaging a group of people, especially ones that don't necessarily know each other, although working with an intact team has its own set of challenges associated with it, right? People are walking in, they may be an intact team and they're walking into this this meeting that's been called with this maybe external facilitator or executive coach or whatever and team building expert, and they're like, yeah, okay, what's this about? Um, the process of welcoming people into a process and welcoming people into something that they're going to engage with that may be different from what they're expecting or what they're used to, or there may be variety of thoughts and feelings. I think of us as, I've often thought of us as having multiple bodies, right? One of the first things I would, in fact, do as a welcoming practice is to invite people to just take a moment to reflect very briefly. How present are you right now? 0 to 100%. How much of you is actually here? Especially when I'm doing something in person, obviously I can see you all sitting in the room. I know you're physically here, except for this one name on the list, and there's an empty chair, so I know Sarah hasn't shown up yet. You know, but besides that, we are often walking into any work context with all sorts of stuff we're bringing with us into the meeting that may or may not necessarily need to be there. But we're walking in with thoughts about what's happening. We're thinking, coming in with thoughts of all the stuff that we're not doing because I'm going into this meeting. We may have some feelings about that. So we have a mental body that's thinking about all that. We have an emotional body that's maybe having some feelings. Maybe your child is at home sick and you can't be there because you have to be here, whatever. So I think that process of welcoming people into the moment is a really important part of the process of getting started and starting to do whatever we're going to do together. And giving people, and even just that idea of a mindfulness practice, to take a moment to just notice and recognize where you are right now. the fact that we're sitting in this room, but where are you? How much of the rest of you is actually here, and how much of you is in the last meeting you were just in, or the phone call you had with your boss or your upset customer just before you walked in or whatever, right? That whole process is absolutely key for navigating good and producing good meetings and ultimately getting to the outcomes that you want to try to get to at the end of the day.
I feel like you just described the way I start every single meditation session that I do for myself is just like, what am I bringing? What am I bringing in my mind, in my body, in my feelings? Like, what's there for me right now? Can I just acknowledge it and then decide that I can just do this practice for the next however many minutes and set that aside for right now?
Yeah. And it's
So,
not necessarily a practice that's often practiced at work, right? And if if we could start all of our meetings in that kind of way, in fact, there are many, I mean, my own company and meetings that I've had, own companies that I've been involved with, and a lot of other work contacts, I've been lucky to be involved with organizations that have implemented that as a practice where you start a meet. It doesn't take very long. Just it only has to take a minute or two, but taking a moment or two to just notice where you are, see if anybody has anything they feel like they need to say to put on the table and acknowledge what's true in the moment. Because I find that when we do, if we're able to acknowledge and actually vocally speak, back to that vocalization piece, if we're able to actually vocally speak something that's on our mind that's actually keeping us from really being there, maybe I'm not well today, or a child is sick, or I just heard some bad news about a parent or a friend or neighbor or something, just naming it and getting it on the table, number one, it creates that level of vulnerability, creates a certain empathy in the room. And you mentioned neuroscience. There are all sorts of neuroscience research about the biochemistry that starts happening when someone does that. There's there's chemicals that get released that are like the empathy chemicals of like, people feel badly for you that you're having a hard day or something really is going on. That creates a connection. And that can become the basis for actually having a more productive meeting. Because I know if I come in and I'm able to offload that and put it on the table and then I can forget about it, otherwise I'm thinking about it all the time. So there's something about externalizing some of those things that keep us from being actually present in the moment that can help us become more present and be more productive and effective.
the other piece there that you're saying is if there's something troubling me and I share it, I can receive people's empathy and compassion. And that, just from my own personal experience thinking about it, like once you receive it, it gives you that little bit of
Yes.
like it lets you just settle a little, right? Because you're not as pent up because you've named it and been cared for in some way. Even if it's just like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry,
Right.
right? Right?
Right.
Even if it's just the acknowledgement and that little bit of care, like definitely um helps,
Yep. And
and
especially when a senior leader does it themselves,
yes,
that kind of makes everybody else say, oh, and oftentimes when especially a senior leader shares something like that, other people will say, I have the same thing going on. Like
that's
my mother
right.
just fell last night and broke her hip and she's in the hospital today. And I'm like, I'm kind of freaking out about it, and I'm sorry, I'm going to have to leave at 4 because I have to make sure I can, right? So it's interesting how even that level of sharing, and that's again, we're coming back to the welcoming practice.
That's right.
What do I need to do to be or say so that I can be here and be the best version of myself I can be and be most effective and helpful and productive in this meeting?
I love it. And you're talking about the example of a single meeting, but I think this is easily kind of ramped up to workplace culture,
Yeah.
right? And creating a culture of welcoming. And a lot of times people talk about inclusion, but you can't really have that unless people feel welcome.
Yep. Agreed. And yeah, the culture ends up being informed by some of those day-to-day practices. It's the lived experience of the values of the organization and the norms and the behaviors. So, we often talk about, well, what can we do to actually nurture workplace culture or nurture cultures that create healthy workplaces where people have a positive experience of being at work, which is not always the case. And part of it is just these small little things that leaders can do in a moment to moment. It really comes down to how we relate to the people around us and how we relate to the context that we're in, whether it's a meeting, with our teams or colleagues or meeting with customers or clients or whatever it is.
Yeah, and I would say they're actually not small little things because the impact they have is so big,
Right.
right? Just taking that moment to acknowledge the suffering, the humanity, whatever's going on with another human being as opposed to pushing past it. Like that is how we build relationship. That's how we build trust in a workplace, and that's how we shift a workplace from a place where we're just like kind of on the time clock to a place where we actually feel welcome.
Yep.
Yeah, I think you can't compassion and empathy and ways to express that, like we can't overstate that, right?
Right.
Especially coming from the very top leadership.
Yep. And you're right. I did not, and it's interesting. I mean, this is even an example. I didn't mean to, uh, what's the word? Dominion, make diminutive the idea of things being small. Um, these what we think of as sort of random acts of kindness or small moments, they're not big, huge pieces of our strategy. They're small little practices that we can do. And I say small because they're easy. They're simple and short. They don't have to necessarily take a lot of time. And yes, they are the things that can have a huge impact when practiced on a regular basis.
That's right. And I guess the thing that I'm curious about is for folks who are in leadership that are trying to maybe shift culture or improve their leadership style, how do we do that from a place of authenticity? Because I don't know about you, but I can kind of feel it when it feels like someone's giving me lip service. You know what I mean? Like not quite authentic. So I
Hmm.
think because that's like the other key ingredient for me is I want a leader who acknowledges my humanity, whether it's my kid's sick or like you said, my mom broke her hip, like really acknowledges my humanity, but that it's coming from not I'm checking off a box, but I'm actually authentically connecting.
Right. Yeah, it's a very good question. And it's a tricky one. Um, it's tricky because of what I like to talk about a lot in leadership is the intention impact gap, right? Leaders, so some of my work is around this idea of presence and leadership or executive presence. And I have a particular orientation to that and a particular definition of it. Because I think of presence actually, it's not a thing that you either have or you don't have. I would say it's not even an ability that you develop, although I think it's something that you can develop. But I think of presence as a process. Presence is a process of connecting with every dimension of your being. So for a leader, for leadership presence, so that you can make wise choices and achieve an intended impact. Because that's what leaders are tasked to do. Leaders are tasked to have an impact. And oftentimes, senior leaders especially, but any kind of leader who has a team, you have to get things done. You have to have an impact by getting things done through other people. It's the natural progression of becoming a leader. You get really good at what you do as an individual contributor, and you're really good at your job, and you get promoted to being a manager, being a leader. Now you have a team, and so then you have to get stuff done through other people, and you have to make an impact in that kind of way, and you have to make good decisions about that. So the first half of this definition, though, is the process of connecting with every dimension of your being. Well, what do I mean by that? Part of it is about what I was talking about earlier, these sort of multiple bodies. I think we are multidimensional beings. We have these bodies, and sometimes we wake up and our body feels like crap, and or we're in pain, and we have to deal with that. That's part of our lived experience, and we're going into work navigating that. We have we have all these thoughts going on in our minds. We have all these emotions going on in our minds. We have various other aspects of what makes up our personality and who we are as people that is informing us every single day. And so the process of the way all of this is connected, this mindfulness piece, this welcoming piece, a lot of the process of connecting is the process of becoming aware of all the different aspects of what's going on for me in any given moment. So I may be tasked, I may be a leader that wants to try to do what you're just suggesting and create more of a welcoming environment and an inclusive workplace and an exciting place to be and enhance employee engagement. And so I might try some of these practices and back to the intention impact gap, it might be my intent to help people feel. So it's like, hell, let's just go around and say, your favorite color, whatever it is. It's like, okay, great, thanks. All right, now let's really get to work. And there's something about how we phrase things. There's something about how we use our voices and our bodies. There's something about what's happening in our minds, because in the back of my mind, if I'm a senior leader, I'm probably more worried about the results at the end of the quarter and what's going to happen at the end of this week, and are we hitting our targets, and are we getting our work done? Because again, leaders are responsible for getting stuff done and getting stuff done through other people. So I can't even control it all. I have to get it done through you all. And so I may try to impose or create something that theoretically is supposed to help, but it's the way that I do it. It's who I'm being when I'm saying what I'm saying or doing what I'm doing that's actually having the impact and what you're experiencing. So that means I have to be very conscious and mindful about how I'm doing what I'm doing, which means I have to connect with my thoughts and my feelings and my body and what my body is doing and how I'm saying what I'm saying. And am I listening? And am I creating space for people to actually, if I'm, the idea of welcoming is inviting other people to participate and speak. And there's that classic scene from, was it Office Space? I think it was. Um, hey, how's it going? Good, great, great, great. Listen, if you could just come in on Sunday, that'd be awesome. That'd be great, right? Um, that's a classic example of the stereotype of someone who's asking a question but doesn't really want to hear the answer. How you doing? Great, good to hear it. All right, let's move on. And so there's maybe an intention to ask the question, but there's the impact that's experienced is less than optimal because the leader's not being very present in the moment and being conscious of the impact that they're having. I'll stop there. That was a
Yeah.
that was a
No, that
long
was
explanation of what I'm saying.
no, it
Sorry about
was
that.
good. It was really good. And I think that as you were talking, what was coming into my mind um, is, I agree. I'm a leader. I run an organization, and my board has some expectations of productivity, income goals that I should be meeting, etc., right? And I often say I don't have an organization that does mindfulness. I have a mindful org, right? Which
Right.
is different. And so I have had to decide because I've had, an employee that popped his kneecap off and had, and we're tiny, right? And had to go through surgery and take 4 weeks off. And I only have two staff, So that means a lot when one staff is gone for a month, right?
Yeah.
So, I have had to decide that in order to have a mindful organization, that actually the thing that's most important is the relationships I have with my staff.
Yeah.
The thing that's most important is that we are modeling what we want other organizations to embody, right? And if that means that for that quarter we didn't reach the goals we had because it was interrupted with humanity, that we all break sometimes, it does happen. We need to
Hmm.
heal. That's actually more important, right? That's actually more important, and that I know treating that person in their full dignity and worth is actually going to result in a deeper relationship with that person, right? With their
Absolutely.
with their family, because they're going to appreciate us being gracious about it, as opposed to, I don't know what we could have been, whatever negative
Right.
thing could have happened. You know what I mean? Like, so the depth, so that there has to be, in my mind, this idea that relationship and human connection has to be more important than the quarterly bottom line or something like that. And that, unfortunately, I think people are not kind of tolerant of that, and it's not in business places, not the way people talk about things,
Yeah.
but it's real. Like, if you have a small staff and someone gets sick, someone has a baby, someone has
Yeah.
a death in the family, like, anything that could happen in our lives, right? It will interrupt your work.
Right. Right. And the trick, the challenge perhaps is how to make it not necessarily an either or, that can we hold both? Which is to say, yes, the particular output of that particular quarter may slip. And in the long run, if you look at the aggregate or you look at the year and you look at the turnover rate, your turnover rate is going to be much lower because you have much higher employee engagement because you're operating in the way that you're operating, which is oriented around relationship.
Yep.
So,
That's exactly
yeah,
right. That's
in the
exactly
long
right.
term, like, can you look at the long term? And of course, businesses are always having to navigate the balance between the short term and the
Yes.
long term, right? You
Yes.
have to have a long-term vision and strategy, and you have to execute in the short term, quarter to quarter.
Right.
So again, both of those have to play. And can we hold both the humanity and the kind of workplace culture and the kind of relationship-oriented culture that actually can be successful and can be um, and oftentimes in those kinds of environments where there is that level of understanding and that level of compassion and that level of quality of relationships, the few people you have left and or the volunteers around you are more likely to be able to step up when someone breaks off their kneecap and needs to go away or is on maternity leave, right? Sometimes you can have other people step up and you can actually keep pace with what the expectations are because you've got people that are willing to step up because everybody knows, hey, if it were me, I know I'd be taken care of here in this instance as well.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And then, just to shift a little bit, you touched on this a little bit earlier, is that kind of leading by example. And so, in my example, I'm, as a leader, trying to encourage my staff, my volunteers, all the folks, to make sure that they're doing their self-care. And it's really hard as the leader of an organization to find time for any self-care,
Yeah,
right? And this is actually one of the challenges I talk about with folks that I work with, is how do you fit in a mindfulness practice? How do you find the time to do all the things you need to do related to self-care? And so I'm really curious about, I don't know, conversations you're in around self-care, self-compassion, and doing those things for ourselves that I think become the modeling and permission for those that we're leading to do the same.
absolutely. Absolutely. I am in conversations with people about this a lot. It seems like it's a pretty hot topic right now. And I think it is in part because there's a lot of talk and a lot of experience of burnout and how prevalent that is and how, well-being in the workplace is becoming more and more important because I think companies are starting to recognize the impact on things like burnout has on an organization. So, from a very real numbers perspective, and again, we talked about turnover when people aren't able to be there, and engagement, employee engagement, when people aren't really engaged, and that often indicators of that often are people being willing to go, above and beyond the call of duty, as it were, and step up when needed, and as well as the degree to which they're healthy and they don't take sick days. Um, that actually does have an impact on the bottom line in an organization. And so I think there are a lot of conversations about this question. How do we create time for ourselves and make time for ourselves for self-care and for the kind of practices you're talking about? And it's not easy. And it means oftentimes that we have to make sacrifices in other departments of our lives. So it comes down in a lot of ways, I think, to prioritization. Which things are going to be most important? And is it something that I'm going to do absolutely daily? Or am I going to find a way to be able to do different types of practices at different times during the week? So it's not like I am always going to take an extra hour in the morning for whatever exercise or physical exercise or meditation practice or whatever. We have to find ways we can fit them in. I think the other thing that I'm recognizing and seeing, um, I'm in a I'm involved with an organization called changingwork.org, and I co-facilitate a creative arts cohort within the within this collective, and it's a membership organization. There's a lot of people like me that are practitioners and coaches and executive coaches and consultants, and there are a number of people that are also there are people leaders involved in the organization. There are all sorts of different kind of people involved in this organization. One of the things that we talk about and actually practice in our monthly meeting and the creative arts cohort is taking a we take in every month when we have a 1 hour meeting, we take a 7 minute creative arts break. 7 minutes to just go off and do anything you feel like doing that is somewhat creative. It could be doodling, it could be walking, you could get up and dance, you could write a song, you could play a jingle, you could, have a dance break and put on some music and dance around. Whatever it is, there's something about just taking a short amount of time during 1 hour of your time, of your day, just taking 7 minutes to do something different and creative. These are little practices that can be done that we can weave into our day. So it doesn't have to be a huge, long sitting meditation practice necessarily. We can also find time throughout the day and creating transitions. I think that's another key thing for a lot of leaders. We often have a tendency to back up our schedule back to back to back to back meetings, and often end up being perpetually late to the next meeting, because one meeting goes over. So can we schedule things in a way where we actually book into our calendar like a 5 to 10 minute transition time? So I actually have time to get up and go get a cup of tea or have a bite to eat or take a breath or to come back around to where we were earlier in this conversation. What do I need to let go from my last meeting that I don't really need to bring into my next meeting? And how can I show up and be as present as I possibly can be? And what do I need to do that, even if it's 3 to 4 minutes?
I love a lot of what you're saying. So first, I love the idea of 7 minutes because often when we're teaching people to first integrate meditation into their daily life, I tell them find 5 to 10 minutes somewhere in your day every day, whether it's right when you sit down to have your cup of coffee or just at the end of brushing your teeth in the morning or in the evening, like wherever you can find it when you're going to have your lunch, whatever it is, whatever works for you, just find 5 to 7 minutes to start and just have some intention around trying out a practice, whatever that looks like for you in this day, right? Whatever that is. And so I love this idea of just 7 minutes. It's like enough. Everyone can find 7 minutes,
Yeah,
right?
theoretically. And if you
Yeah.
can't, then that's also interesting information, right? If you can't
Yeah.
find 7 minutes in your day, are there changes that you want to make? You know?
It could be as simple as when you drive to get home and you stop in the garage or the driveway,
Yep.
pause for 5 minutes before you walk in the door.
Yep.
Regulate yourself and see if your family interactions shift at all, or even on your way to work, something like that, right?
Yep.
And
Yeah,
that,
you're
sorry, go
also
ahead.
indicating, no, sorry, you're also indicating something interesting, which is, can you do something slightly differently from the routine that you normally do? There's
Hmm.
something about that. There's a thing called pattern interruption. We get so into a regular way of doing things,
Hmm.
even maybe drive to work slightly differently, or back into the garage instead of forward into the garage, or whatever. There are the maybe, brush your teeth with your opposite hand for once,
Mm,
just like, what's that like?
yeah.
Wow, that's really hard and strange to do. And yet there's something about that that does also help shift us out of some of the routine patterns that we get into where we start to think, I don't have time for anything. I can't do
Right.
that.
Right.
So
Yeah, totally. And the thing that I was gonna say too about like taking that pause before you go in the door, either at home or at work, is exactly what you were saying about transitions,
yep.
right? So building in a pause, and I've worked with as a meditation instructor people that have really stressful jobs like firefighters, right? Or
Yep.
teachers that work with really, really challenging groups of kiddos that kind of escalate them so that by the end of the day they're all revved up, right? Or they're stressed out. And they don't want to bring that, is either the firefighter or the teacher, they don't want to bring that home to their own kids,
Right.
right? They don't want to feel escalated around their own kids and short-tempered or overwhelmed or whatever the word would be for their situation. And so
Yeah.
that's where that transition, kind of honoring what I'm feeling, what just happened, and where I want to be, is so, so important and a skill,
Yep.
actually a
Yep.
skill. So I love that you named that because we offer incorporate skill building around that in the courses we do for people that are in high stress jobs because
Right.
it's so important and not talked about.
Right. Right. Exactly. And another tool or technique for that is, and obviously you're going to be familiar with this, but um, just taking a few breaths. There's a idea of you're never more than 3 breaths away from a bit more grounded or a bit more centered. And there are these was it 4-4-8 um, practice where you breathe in on a count of four, hold it for a count of four, and then exhale on a count of eight. And doing that 3 times. Again, it only takes about a minute to do it, but there's something very powerful that happens, especially when you start to bring your awareness and your mindfulness to your breath and actually feeling the breath in your body. There's something part I've also studied self-regulation therapy, so that some of it comes from that, which is a way of healing trauma. And so really being in touch with the felt sense of your body, Peter Levine talks about this too, um, of trying to actually feel the breath in your body. Like when you take a nice big full breath, where do you feel the breath? Do you feel it coming in your nose? Can you feel it maybe in the back of your throat, the air passing through the back of your throat? Can you feel the breath in your chest or in your belly? Trying to get a sense of where is the breath in my body? Can I actually feel it physically? I have another big thing that I do with a lot of corporate leaders too, which is inviting them to feel their feet. Well, a moment ago, you probably didn't have your attention on your feet, but because I just said it, now you do, right? It's like, oh, there they are. Yeah. Can you feel your feet in your shoes or on the floor in your socks, right? Can you feel yourself sitting in the chair where your body is touching the chair? Can you have a sense of that? These small little practices, again, they don't have to be like a half an hour, 20-minute meditation. You can do this in 3 minutes at your desk chair in between calls or in between Zoom calls or in between meetings. Just to take a moment to, like you said, when you're sitting in the driveway before you go inside, can I feel my feet? Can I feel my body? Can I feel my breath? Can I just try to do nothing but focus on my breath coming in and going out, even for 3 big full breaths? just that much can be enough to actually shift brainwaves.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Yeah, and there, so just people listening, if breath isn't accessible for you, there are lots of other techniques. The feel your feet technique is a good one. One of the things that we guide as a resourcing practice is notice any positive sensation in the body and then just focus on that for, you know, a minute. That's
Yep.
it. Just to
Yep.
resource yourself if you're feeling escalated. So yeah, all of the above. All of
Right.
the above are great. Well, I feel like we should be winding down here, although I think we could just keep talking for hours. There's so much good, rich stuff. I guess, do you have any final thoughts you want to share about creating a welcoming team or community, organization, or mindfulness and leadership? Like any final thought on the topic today that you want to share that we didn't talk about?
Thank you. Yeah, I would say it all starts with us. All starts with an internal process. So perhaps one of the hardest ways and places and areas to welcome is to welcome ourselves and our own experience. Um, and so I think for anyone listening, if you're wanting to start to make some shifts or you're wanting to incorporate some of this idea of welcoming, what does welcoming mean and look like? It starts with how do I welcome myself into my own experience of myself today? Um, there's also something about in theater, we talk a lot about the idea of intention. What kind of intention do I want to have today? And thinking about a day, or even just going into a meeting, like what intention do I have going into this meeting? Because our state of mind is very powerful and in what what we manifest in our lives. There's a very old saying that goes, where attention goes, energy flows, which is to say, what you put your mind on is what you manifest, is what you create. So it makes me think of oh, there's a line from one of the Star Wars movies, be mindful of your thoughts, young Padawan. Your emotions, betray or deceive you or something. But like, be mindful of your thoughts. Be mindful of what you're focusing on. And so, coming back to that welcoming, coming being an internal job, um, how can we work with ourselves to welcome our own experience of what's happening in the moment, and what's happening to us? And have you talked a lot earlier about empathy and compassion, and that came up in our conversation. Can we have that for ourselves? Because it has to start with us. Um,
No, I
yeah.
love I love this idea of welcoming ourselves and that self-compassion is the path to sharing compassion with others. I
Yeah.
just really love that. Yeah, that's awesome. Good stuff. Well, I end all of my conversations by asking if folks have a favorite mindfulness or, in your case, leadership resource that you could recommend to our listeners, that might help support them in their integration of what we've talked about. And I know you did already mention the Stephen Levine, A Gradual Awakening. So
Yep.
thank you for that one. But is there anything else you want to share?
Sure. Well, in terms of the leadership stuff, a lot of my work is around values, leadership, and culture and the integration of those things
Hmm.
and focusing on the process of connecting and connecting with yourself and connecting with others to be able to be successful. So people can learn more about that at my website, which is Van Ness and Company, www.vn-co.com, vn-co.com, Van Ness and Company. And also, I was thrilled last year to be a contributor to a book called Leading with Self-Awareness, Starting from the Inside Out. It was produced and published by this organization, the Changing Work, that I mentioned. And it's a really well, it's all about leading with self-awareness. It's all about that whole process. And it's really a book of 25 different stories from all of us that were authors of this and contributors to this book, sharing our own stories of our own experiences of how we've learned about leadership and self-leadership. And so I actually really love this book. I love reading all the other chapters as well. So again, it's called Leading with Self-Awareness, Starting from the Inside Out, and it's available on Amazon.
Awesome. We'll link to it in the notes
Great.
for the podcast. Yeah, that's a great resource for folks to have. Well, Tim, I have really loved getting to know you a little bit better. I know we've had some conversation in the past, but
Yep.
I've really, really enjoyed this. And I just want to thank you so much for taking the time today to talk with me and share your ideas.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. We should do it again sometime.
Yeah.
Say Something Studios.